Hey Caitlin, hey Kira.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being with me today. This morning for Caitlin and this evening for Kira because Kira, you're in Japan right now and you're 13 hours ahead of us, so it's quite late right now. I want to start by talking a bit about your journey both as filmmakers and how you actually came to work together on the film that we're going to be talking about. So tell me a bit about your respective journeys. Like, how did you get into film?
Caitlin, do you want to go first?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So I like Kira, we both knew pretty early on that we wanted to do something related to film. My journey, I guess, started more with an interest in journalism, which then kind of turned into photojournalism. And then in college, it kind of turned into just interest in art and design and film in general. So I think I always knew in some way I wanted to do something within documentary film, but it wasn't until the last year or so that I really knew what that was. So I think it's definitely like an ongoing journey in figuring out how to work within the realm of documentary film.
Nice. And Kira, what has this like? What brought you to filmmaking?
Yeah, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was a kid. I it was just it was kind of like a childhood dream of mine, and I guess over the years it's just taken a lot of different forms, and I realized the more I got into film, the more I realized how many different paths within film there were. So I went to NYU with Caitlin and sort of explored a lot of different things like animation and documentary. But towards the end and after I graduated, it started becoming clear that I wanted to make animated documentaries and sort of films that were in between the kind of borders of animation, fiction, and documentary.
And particularly in your experience, you started off working more with the idea that you were going to do fiction films, and then you sort of the transition because you do a lot of experimenting in your work. So how did you get to documentary?
Yeah, so I kind of didn't really have a clear idea when I first decided I wanted to do film. It was I was so sure of that, but once I really got into it, I realized I guess in college there was something about the way the fiction sets were, and that these sets tended to be really focused on like very high production value and getting the most expensive equipment, and a lot of it was like money focused. And then I saw these like straggling documentary filmmakers, and they were really focused on story, and it really excited me because it was kind of this idea of what I thought indie filmmaking was before I went to college. And when I went to what really solidified that was when I went to this semester program in Cuba, where I studied documentary filmmaking for 4 months. And they really we didn't have so much to work with in terms of equipment. So we were kind of limited, but it was really refreshing in a way because all you had to focus on was the story. So from there, I kind of just grew out of that and started becoming interested in kind of hybrid documentaries, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so this Mizuko is your first film together. How did you get together to make the film? Like, what made you decide to work together on this film?
Yeah, so Mizuko was based off of my own story and things that happened to me. And when I realized that I wanted to make the film, it became clear that like I would need a really strong partner to make it, because it's so much in my own head that I think it's really, when you're making a film about yourself, it can be really easy to kind of slip into just like, I don't know, not being able to take a step back from it. And on top of that, Caitlin and I had collaborated in college a few times, and she from what I had seen of her work, she had these really interesting kind of like paper ripping style of animation, and it was really kind of visceral, and it fit the tone that I thought was appropriate for the film. So I approached her, and we kind of decided to make this thing, but in the end we took on a lot, both of us took on a lot of different roles. So both of us were producing, directing, editing, and animating. So it was a lot, but we kind of developed that partnership as we went along.
So I want to talk about the different roles that you had, but first, what was it like for both of you when you decided to work on this very personal story? So you can tell us a little bit about where this film comes from, and I would like to know, what was it like for you, Katelyn, working on such a personal story and such a personal issue, and for you also, Kira, because it came from your own story, from your experience.
Kira, you want to talk?
Yeah, I can start just how it was for me. I mean, I think this was obviously a very, very personal story to Kira, and the way that I approached it was always more of just working with a friend. I mean, like Kira said, we had worked with each other on a few projects, and we were also just close friends in college. So when we started it, it was going to be a very personal project for Kira. We had no funding. We had no concept of people actually seeing this eventually and where it was going to go. So I think it was just kind of like, let's make this together, and like, let's help and have Kira get all of these emotions out and see what happens. So I think like it was obviously, we were taking on a lot of the roles together, and what was really important from the beginning was just to have trust and respect for each other. And I think, like putting any ego aside and working really closely together and just listening to each other and making sure that, this was a very difficult thing for Kira to do because it was so personal. So making sure that she could feel the space to kind of explore these emotions and these feelings in a way without being completely overwhelmed by the work and the production of a film. And something that I think before we even started doing this, like Kira kind of said before, we were both interested in moving away from like larger film sets and making projects that, were kind of like smaller crews, less equipment. And that was something that was really important to this, and just to make it more intimate and make the process of it easier to have us doing all of these roles, which of course made it really difficult. But I think it did kind of help the energy in the film. You can tell that, we were kind of like, we touched every single frame of this film in some way. And we were working together on like every small detail. And I think that was, an important part of the process.
And do you feel that this brought you closer together? Like sharing this experience?
Yeah,
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. There was like moments where, I mean, it's crazy because it was such a journey. It was like, there were moments of like super high, like some of the most like, I'm going to be honest, some of the most exciting moments of my life, because I've wanted to do film for so long. And this is the first time I got like recognition for it, from, getting a grant, and a lot of things came to us for this project. So there was like super exciting moments for both of us where we just went from saying like, oh, we'll make a video and put it on Vimeo and maybe it'll get a lot of views and we'd be happy with that, to saying like, oh wow, it's like really getting into really big festivals and winning awards. And so it was really exciting. And at the same time, it was like, there was the highs, but there were also lows. And those brought us closer together too, because it was like, there were some really, really tough things about making this film. Just from how many different roles we were juggling, and for me too, it being a personal story. But both Katelyn and I think we don't get really angry. We don't like blow up, which I I think is a really good thing, because like both of us were able to stay pretty calm when things were really hectic. But yeah, it was definitely like a crazy journey, and it was a really cool thing to
So
experience.
for you personally, from the time you decided to make this film, like what has it been like for you, putting out your story and your experience?
Yeah, I don't know. It it was hard. Um, it was weird because the story itself, the reason why I really wanted to make a film was completely stepping outside of myself. It wasn't like, oh, I want to share my story. It was like, oh, this would make a really good film. And there was a kind of like hesitancy and sort of like embarrassed part of myself that was just like, this is really putting myself out there. And it kind of, too, because since it started out as this very low budget production between friends that turned into this thing where a lot of people were seeing it, I had to kind of like reckon with it. I think both of us did. We had to like sit. We never really had a moment where we were like, oh wow, this changed from what we thought it was going to be. We just kind of had to roll with it. So it was tough kind of realizing that like this really intimate part of myself was going to be seen by a lot of people, especially when you're an artist and you get really like compulsive about making it really good and making it, you know, making it feel like something that people will relate to. So there's all the insecurities of being an artist normally, plus like it's actually related to you and your own story. So it is scary, but in the end, you kind of get detached from it a little bit once you've spent enough time in the editing room and with the story and talking about it to other people. So yeah, I think it worked out.
And what was it like juggling like all these roles, co-directing, co-producing, co-editing? Katelyn, you did, I think, stop motion animation, and Kira, you did the watercolor, and you're mixing animation with live action, and there's a lot. It's a short film, but there's so much going on in there. Like, what was it like to juggle all of that? Must have been an immense workload.
It was really difficult. It was really hard. I mean, I think we were very ambitious, kind of without realizing that we were being ambitious. It was just kind of like, this is the best way that we both think would be to tell this film, so let's just do it. And without, I mean, we definitely thought about everything, but we were planning a shoot in Japan. We were doing like reenactment shoots in the US. And then on top of that, of course, animating, which took months of work. Yeah, it was very hard. I feel like Kira might have something more insightful to say about the workload, but it was tough.
Yeah, not necessarily insightful. But yeah, I think I look back and I wonder what the film would have been like if we had more of a crew and more like, the biggest thing is neither of us had produced before, right, Katelyn? You have produced?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so we're both producing, and I think when you're kind of just starting off, you underestimate the producer's role. You kind of always think that like, oh, they're just scheduling and like this. I don't know. I always underestimated it. And now I'm just like, producers are incredible. They're totally unappreciated. And I do think that, yeah, like a lot of our energies went towards just planning and budgeting. You know, we had never gotten a grant before, so that takes a lot of time to learn how to manage money and how to, you know, we were managing ourselves pretty much. So at the same time, I think about like, if we had hired a bunch of people, if we had the money to hire a bunch of people, maybe there are elements that we wouldn't have been able to control so well, or maybe things would have turned out differently. In the end, I think we were just doing what we had available to us. We, you know, even though we got a grant, it wasn't we didn't have a huge budget in the end. And we did prioritize doing frame by frame animation and doing Super 8 film, which cost a lot of money to process and scan. And those kind of like very important visual elements were top priority for us. So then we're like, we'll have to sacrifice some of our sanity to make it work. But yeah, I think all things considered, both of us, I'm pretty proud of what we were able to manage.
So what was it like doing all of this animation, which is a lot of work on such a tight budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stop motion, at least, that's, in a way it felt like that was the most budget friendly because we were doing a lot of the work. So we could kind of take as much time as we wanted, and it let us, you know, redo things if we didn't like it. And the only money we were wasting is like our own time in a way. So it feels like for the budget that honestly was like the most, it was very comfortable. But we were able to hire, I think the biggest thing was we were able to hire a couple other watercolor animators who were really incredible, and they both worked remotely, but we were able to kind of, you know, work closely with them still, and that was really, really helpful to have that. Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the film now. What is this film about?
The film is about when I had to get an abortion a few years ago. I was living in New York, and for me, you know, I never really questioned if that were to happen to me. I never thought it would happen to me, but it did. And I always knew that if it did, I wouldn't really think twice, like I would get an abortion. And so when that time came along, I was in shock, but I had support from my family and my friends, and it went really smoothly. I had insurance under my parents, and it was just shockingly easy. That's not to say it wasn't scary and physically kind of scary. You know, I had to be put out while it was being done. I'd never been put out for like a surgery or anything before. So it's all these things that you kind of never really expect to happen, and then it all happens so fast. But afterwards, you know, I just kind of thought, all right, it's something I experienced and now it's over. And I didn't really think about it. But then a few months later, I found myself feeling really emotional about it. I'm going to be candid here. I'm not always candid about it, but I took mushrooms. I went on a mushroom trip, and afterwards, I just started bawling and thinking about it and really feeling all those emotions for the first time. And I realized how much I had suppressed because I kind of had this idea that abortion is just a surgery. It's just the removal of a clump of cells in your body. And I think that comes from kind of how this pro-life, pro-choice debate has developed in the U.S. Pro-life is very, you know, kind of this religious approach to abortion, and it's seen as murder, and it's very extreme. But no one ever thinks about how pro-choice is extreme in its own way, or how sort of the collective mindset of pro-choice has become, which is this: it's just surgery, it's just removal of a clump of cells, it's nothing. And this argument to try to you know, give this choice to a lot of women, which I completely agree with. I think pro-choice is absolutely necessary, and I don't want anyone to think it's not. But I think this unfortunate development of pro-choice is that it's now made a lot of people feel like it's not a big deal, or feel like they should think it's not a big deal, even subconsciously. So sorry, this is a very long explanation, but so that's kind of stuff that I started feeling more aware of when I realized that that there were emotions that I hadn't processed. So I started kind of looking into how people in Japan deal with abortion, because I'm half Japanese. And I found this ritual, this Buddhist ritual that has been performed for centuries, where people can kind of grieve and properly deal with those emotions. So it doesn't really judge abortion. It doesn't talk about, people don't really concern themselves with the reasons why, but this is just about what happens afterwards. And it's this really beautiful process where you go to these special Buddhist temples that are specifically for people who have either had abortions or miscarriages, and you kind of just, you physically perform this ritual of having these statues that represent your lost child, and kind of sending all your love and care into it. So long story short, I saw that and I thought, this is just this really incredible thing that I think a lot of people in the US could benefit from. People who feel like they need to get an abortion, but still feel very upset about it, and feel like they need to process it. So this film was born out of that, and I realized it would make for a really good story, and that's when I approached Katelyn. So that's kind of the whole story there. But
Caitlin, had you ever heard of this tradition before? When Kira approached you with the idea for this story for the film, like, what did you think of this? As someone who for whom like, it wasn't your tradition at all, your culture.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I had not heard before, and I think, the first conversations we had made me realize the ways that I had been seeing abortion as this very binary view for so long, and made me realize how important it would be to talk about this in a different way. Both of our entire lives, the conversation in the US has been pro-life and pro-choice, and there has not been really any room to feel in between those, or any room to really talk in between those. And so this was it felt really important to bring this ritual that respects the emotion of having an abortion, and that respects the process of having an abortion in a way that doesn't condemn it, or in a way that doesn't, just throw guilt onto the person. And that is, something that did not exist here. And I think what we realized too is, the religious views in the US that have contributed to the abortion debate are rooted in Christianity. And there hasn't really been any space for any religion outside of that to come in and, be part of the conversation. So it felt like to bring in this Japanese Buddhist ritual was bringing just a new way of speaking about abortion, still in a religious context, and still in a way that was respectful to the people who were experiencing it.
And what was the feedback like from people seeing the film, both in Japan and the US and maybe elsewhere? What was it like? What did you note, like any differences in the way people received the film?
it's hard to say, because most of our festival run has been post-COVID. So we haven't been able to we had our world premiere at the International Documentary Festival in Amsterdam. And then after that, we weren't able to really see face to face how people react to the film. So it's just been kind of like through comments online or kind of word of mouth. But the thing that did interest both me and Katelyn in Amsterdam was, I think in Europe, maybe it hits a little less hard than it would in the US, because abortion isn't as controversial in a lot of countries in Europe. So I think from what we've seen, there's people we've shown the film to in the US, and they get really emotional and approach us and talk about how much they related to it. But maybe that it is a specific thing where in America, those emotions are suppressed a lot more. In terms of screening in Japan, we haven't screened it in Japan yet, but hoping to do that down the line. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the audience might be different there too.
Okay. And have you had anybody approach you after having seen the film with their own personal experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens most often is women who've had abortion themselves saying like, wow, this is really meaningful to me. And that's been like the most rewarding thing for me and Katelyn. It's like, it's really all you can hope for when you make a film.
And just, have you had, how would I say it, the persons who says like, you know, the ritual, it makes, it gives them the space where they can also grieve, and it's something that they would like to do themselves. Have you had anyone, you know, give you this kind of feedback? Because the tradition itself is so beautiful. Creating this space so people can grieve and they can, as Katelyn, you were saying, you know, and not have this weight of guilt or shame or anything related to that. So have you had like any returns like in that sense where people like, you know, having this sort of doll or this statue, this where you have this ritual, you know?
Yeah, we haven't had a specific person say that they would jump to that they would want to do that yet, but we actually, from the kind of early conception of the film, Katelyn and I were talking about how cool it would be if we were able to kind of hold events in the US with a screening of the film where people who've experienced abortion can make their own Jizo statue and maybe have some kind of installation somewhere where people can put their Jizo statues together. I do think that's something that Katelyn and I are probably both interested in doing down the line after COVID, hopefully. But I think it would be really impactful if people were able to experience it themselves.
There is a very poetic flow to this film. The element of water is very, very present. It's, you know, you really have this feeling of flow in the film. What motivated like this choice of water being such a strong element? How did this link to your personal experience?
Yeah, so the thing about the Buddhist ritual is it's rooted in the kind of Buddhist belief or sort of thinking behind how life and death works, and there's a really interesting sort of philosophy behind this ritual of how people come from water and they return to water when they die. So it's kind of just this idea that everyone comes from this big soup of just life, and when you're born, it's not just this moment where you're suddenly born, it's more of this gradual process, and you're slowly poured into life. And when you die, you slowly pour back out. So there's no line that you can draw between life and death. And I just thought that was so captivating. And for me, I had been interested in Buddhism for several years before this happened. But what was interesting is this film kind of solidified my desire to study Buddhism and be closer to it in some way. And there's still so much that I don't know, and there's so many different types of Buddhism that it kind of doesn't really mean anything to study Buddhism. But anyways, these ideas behind the ritual were so big and looming, and it was hard to tackle that in a short film. It was hard to kind of tackle like the philosophy of life and death, and also talk about my abortion and everything. So we had to make a lot of strong choices in terms of what to include and what to leave out. But all that being said, this idea about everything being connected to water, and all of our lives being connected to water, was something I felt really strongly, and through the writing of the film, I realized I had felt that my whole life. I've always felt really like at home when I'm near the ocean, and I've always like my mom used to say that when I was a baby and crying, she used to just run the faucet and I would stop crying. So there's a lot of just sort of personal reasons why I felt really connected to making a film using the motif of water. But the writing process was really fun in that way, to try to talk about all the ways that I related to this idea. And that's why, this whole kind of storyline of my life in Japan is weaved in this film, because I kind of used my story in Japan as a symbolic way to show my connection with nature and my connection with water. So, whenever I did come here as a kid, Japan is this island country where you're always kind of close to the sea, and all of my family came from a little ocean beach town. So it was just about showing that through those childhood stories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The different perspectives. Katelyn, you mentioned before how the pro-life, pro-choice debate and stances, how it's so binary, and there's like no gray area in between, how all of that is really strongly tied to Christianity. And here, if we're talking about like Christianity, we have the perspective of life where everyone comes from the soil. There we have another perspective, which is we come from water, and the film begins very early on in the film. We have this this imagery of literally being poured, and it gives this really different a different perspective, like sort of that merges, I think, both sides, and in some sense merges pro-choice and pro-life. And I think it's interesting for like a whole lot of different reasons, including your way of working. I know that you're both filmmakers who like to experiment, who like to use hybrid forms, and who I know, Kira, you say that specifically, that you like the gray areas. So I found that I find this really interesting to have these different perspectives that seem to be very different, but in fact, they're very connected. Are there any projects that you're working on presently as a team, or in separately? What's cooking right now?
We're not working on anything as a team right now, but we did make a production company, and through the making of Mizuko, we made a production company, and we both want to continue to make animated documentaries with that. And so we haven't made any new projects with it yet, but we're kind of waiting for the right project to come along, the right story that would use both animation and documentary. I don't know if Katelyn has more to add. But.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that covered it. I think we were both, or at least, this year turned out much different than we both expected. So I think in terms of working on new projects, we're just trying to like figure out how that's actually going to function. I think, it would be so great to work with Kira again on something. And I think, yeah, we want to continue making things that merge not just documentary and animation, but like experimental and narrative that, you know, is a hybrid with documentary, and yeah, making films that, yeah.
Mizuko, for both of you, was your first work, if I'm not wrong, that's where you know, you were reaching really a larger audience, your bigger festivals also, you know, it was your first time doing this circuit and having your film distributed like that, so, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. What was that experience like for you for like a first time getting up there doing a film like that, working with like Tribeca, getting a grant? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, the process of getting the grant took a few months, and we pitched at Doc NYC through IFA and Tribeca. And that, I think, for both of us was one of the most nerve-wracking things we've ever done. We had to get up in front of a theater full of people and a panel of judges, and that was not something we had ever done before. But after we did that, you know, we found out the same day that we got the grant, and it kind of hit us like, oh, okay, now we actually have to make the film. Like, now we have to start the difficult work of doing all of this. But I think, you know, the process of it, we worked together in like a small studio in Brooklyn, and then we went and did the shoots in Japan and other places in New York and the US. And that all felt just very natural. Like I don't think we ever, it never really felt like we were making something for, you know, a big audience. And working with Tribeca, they were so open and so, they were just great mentors and never wanted to, you know, like change the way we were making things. They just kind of would suggest or, you know, offer really great opinions of ways that we could make our lives a little bit easier. So we had a lot of freedom in the process of making. And then I think at our first festival, we premiered at IDFA in Amsterdam. And that was just like an incredibly new experience. It was the first festival for both of us, right, Kira? That was your first one too. So everything just felt new and incredibly exciting. And like, I think I walked away that weekend or that week being more inspired to make documentary films than I ever have. And then so we were kind of like, this is going to be a really great year of meeting so many filmmakers and going to all of these festivals, which was very quickly shifted. So I think, you know, like it was going to be new for us anyway. This is new, what's happening now. So it's kind of hard to say like what it felt like, but a lot of different feelings all the time. And, you know, things are constantly changing now. And yeah. It was very exciting, very nerve-wracking, very new, I guess.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've had the experience with my with Stephanie, who's the director of films, to pitch at IFDEN. So very nerve-wracking experience. But at the same time, as you said, the team at IFDEN, they were just like completely amazing people. So that made the experience, you know, really something else. And having your first, IFA was our first festival also. And it's like, you know, sort of like a mind-blowing experience when you've been in filmmaking and you've been sort of in your little world, you know, elsewhere, and you sort of get thrown in at IFA, and it's like, you know, wow.
It was so fun.
Oh, it's an amazing experience, and I think the connections that you make also are just absolutely incredible. So I can imagine what that must have been like for you both. And right now, like when you were making the film, did you have like any, you know, crazy things happen? And I don't. This is like a question, like, you know, we're making a film. That's what happens, like crazy things. But were there any things that happened like that was like, what?
I don't know. Kayla and I might be thinking the same thing.
Probably.
I don't know if this counts, but have you been to New York before?
Yes.
So you know when you ride the subway, there's the voice that says, "Stand clear of the closing doors, please." So he's that voice has been, you know, the subway voice. I just think of that voice as like the voice of the trains. And I've heard it since I was like a little kid. I grew up in New York. And for the film, we needed a really specific, in the writing of it, I had written, you know, a specific message that says, if you see a pregnant, disabled, or elderly person, please give up your seat. Even better, add a smile, courtesy counts. And it was this like really specific message that I remembered, but I hadn't heard it in a few years. And we kept like riding the subway just constantly for this film, trying to get Super 8 footage, but I didn't hear it. So Katelyn and I thought, what if we reach out to the guy who actually does that voice? And we found him on Instagram. His name's Charlie Pellet, and he's still, you know, he's alive. I thought maybe they were like using that voice from decades back, and maybe it was like 50 years ago, but it turns out he's a voice actor. He's around, and I think we messaged him. We slid into his DMs, yeah. And we messaged him on Instagram saying, can we get this recording from you? And he said, sure, I'll do it. Great. And he recorded it from home. Yeah. He sent it to us. And it was just kind of an absurd thing, because we put like an effect on it to make it sound like it was like you're hearing it on the subway platform, and it's totally like, I feel like you don't notice at all. I did not. But I thought it was pretty cool.
I did think that it was like, you know, it was the real subway.
Yeah.
Subway, yeah. That definitely is a crazy experience.
Yeah, that was very strange.
And is through making this film, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add, Katelyn, in terms of like crazy thing happening, like.
No, I mean that was exactly what I was gonna say. I think for both of us, it was this like beautiful moment where we had spent a lot of time trying to find the sound on the subway, but also just like finding old YouTube videos or old recordings, and it did not exist online. So that was like our last resort, and it worked so easily and so well. So it was just, I feel like
we had other crazy things too. I don't know why, like, they're not coming to mind.
I feel like if you've done that much animation, like something must have happened in there.
Yeah.
Maybe we like blocked it out of our memory. But I mean, this isn't so crazy, but just when we went to Japan, it was really cool because, I mean, we kind of, you know, it was just the two of us shooting in Japan, and it was very, we took our Super 8 camera, which is like this small, and a tripod, and just like ran around Japan going to these Mizuko temples. And it was my like favorite type of filmmaking, which is just like, I don't know, there's like no set. It was just us experimenting. And so the coolest thing that came out of that was we were in Kamakura, Japan, which is where it's kind of this place where a lot of super ancient Buddhist temples exist, but there's this little seaside train, and we had, you know, trains are kind of a big thing in this film, and it just became really clear that we would want to shoot this little seaside train and kind of juxtapose that with the New York subway. But it was really cool to have moments like that where we're just like, oh, let's shoot this. This makes sense. And then it totally paid off in the end. So it was fun.
For both of you, if you were to say like, what would you say that you've learned? Like, what has been like a learning experience for you, like making this film? Do you feel that you've changed in any way through making the film? And like in what way?
So much.
What has been?
We learned so much.
Yeah, I feel like everything I know now I learned in the last like year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, and I still feel like such a baby in terms of like there's so many things about the film industry, regardless of whether or not you think of yourself as a good artist. There's just all the world of just navigating it as an industry that I think just takes like a lifetime to learn. But we learned a lot of it this year. We learned so much about, you know, the process of taking a film from just a baby idea to like seeing it playing at festivals and around the world. It's hard to talk about like specific things that we learned because there's just so many things within that you'd never really think it's not even on your radar until suddenly like it's on your plate and you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The same for you, Katelyn, or is there anything that you feel like, you know, in the like the mass of things that you've experienced making this film, like this one thing that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many. One of the big ones Kira mentioned before is the importance of a producer. That is like a huge thing. I never want to make a film again without a producer. But I think I also just learned and continue learning, you know, like there's not one right way to make a film. And for so long, at least for both of us in school, there was this idea that, you know, you would make this certain way with the big crew of people and the best equipment, and you would do this, this, and this after. And I think just kind of like deconstructing that idea and being like, it doesn't matter what equipment you have, it doesn't matter what size crew you have, the importance is the story and the intention that you put into it. And, you know, finding these weird new experimental ways of making a film is totally okay. And I think that was something that I wasn't really confident in before. You know, I was really interested in experimental and documentary, but never thought that other people would want to watch that. And I think making this has kind of made me realize that that's not true, and that there are also so many other people doing this. And I think, you know, going to festivals and seeing some of the festivals online, there are so many people making such incredible work that just was like out of my radar for so long. And it's just been incredibly inspiring to see that and to know that this is, you know, something that we can continue doing.
And as you both were coming from film school, and do you feel like this was something, like this knowledge was liberated in some way? Like, you know, it took like a weight off your shoulders knowing that you actually didn't need to necessarily have this big crew or have, you know, material in order to tell a story.
Completely, yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, I had to like unlearn a lot of things I was taught in film school to feel confidence in this way of filmmaking. It was just so ingrained in us to do things in a very specific way that I think was very harmful to not just, you know, people who want to tell stories in a different way, but the films in the end, you know, they you don't get as much like there's not as much of like a personal feeling in the films that you see in a lot of the ways that are made and what we were taught. So I think that was, yeah, a really important thing to realize, and a really big weight lifted off of my shoulders. Here, I don't know about yours too.
Yeah, I feel like for me when I was in film school, like, you know, this is the first thing where we've gotten a grant and gotten recognition. But before that, I always made films like this, mostly because I wasn't good at doing it the other way. I feel like I've never really had a choice because this is the only way I can do it. But it was really cool for the first time having people in places like Tribeca who believed in that and who, you know, I was so shocked at how much freedom they gave us and how much they trusted us to make what we were making. And it was really cool to know that there are communities like that who still have a lot of prestige, who believe in that kind of sort of scrappy filmmaking. And that's not to say that like there's still so much that I need to learn, and still so many things about this project where we look back and we're like, oh, I wish we had done it this way. And there's just countless little tiny things that no one notices that we still notice. And you know, I want to get more refined as a scrappy filmmaker, but still retain that kind of scrappiness and still make things in an intimate way and feel like that's valid. and I think this was like a really good first step in that.
And so you both grew up in the US, and Kira, you now live in rural Japan. Do you feel like there's a difference in the way that you create? So in your case, Kira, that you create when you're in New York versus when you're in Japan, like in this place where you are right now. And the Katelyn, what has been the experience like for you also coming from, the US and filming also in Japan?
Yeah, for me, right now, I moved out of New York to one of the most depopulated areas in Japan right now, and I'm doing freelance over here, and it's definitely different because in New York, it's so hard to survive as an artist. It used to be a haven for artists, but now it's really tough. And there's definitely things that I gave up leaving New York in terms of a community and in terms of resources and all kinds of things. But it's been really kind of an interesting experiment to make stuff here. I still feel like I'm hustling in a way over here, but I have the freedom to hustle with projects that I care about and not having like a 9-to-5 desk job. So I'm really excited to see. I think COVID too has changed the way that people, it's drastically changed the way that people think about working and creating. And I'm excited for that kind of future, for where people don't feel like they need to be, where you can kind of create from anywhere or work remotely. So yeah, I'm just gonna see how that plays out and keep making stuff.
So actually for you right now, the COVID situation, like from where you are, it actually fits really well being in a remote area because, right now everything has changed so much that it doesn't really matter. You see that you cannot be necessarily on set or work with people as before. You're already finding different ways to work. So being in a remote area, like it just fits, it's in some way perfectly. And what has it been like for you, Katelyn, like, the experience filming like from the US to Japan?
Yeah, I think when we were in Japan, we were filming temples and the nature and scenery around. So I think the few days that we spent there, it was different than any other type of way I filmed in the US. Kira kind of mentioned this, but it was just us with like a tiny camera. And we had bikes and we would just put it in our backpack and bike to every temple and place we were going. And we kind of, would schedule our time around the sun and not with any other parts of the filming. Like we would wake up as the sun was rising and bike to a temple and get there at the moment, it hit perfectly. We just had a lot of freedom to film things in the way that we wanted. And I think what I realized too is, that's possible to do anywhere. Just because we hadn't done it in the US doesn't mean that you can't do it here. So I think it definitely helped me realize and kind of shift my ideas of what a film shoot needs to be. And now that's definitely the mindset that I go into with everything I do now, is like, what would fit this story best? What actually, makes sense for this moment in this film? Does it need to, be arranged around nature, or does it need to be arranged around, like a certain moment in somebody's life? So yeah, I think it really shifted my ideas of how filming can function.
I think there's so much like that I could say here. The film itself is such a powerful film. The questions that it raises, really strong issues. The experience from listening to both of you of making the film has also been a powerful experience, you know, just both on a personal level and also professionally. I think you've seen like your worlds and your perspectives expand in so many different ways, and I think that the film has this power also doing that for others, even though this may not have been your initial your initial intention. So I want to close our conversation just by thanking you so much for being here with me and for sharing your experiences. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add just to wrap up on, you know, how you feel like putting this film out in the world, it having any impacts. I know Kira mentioned like in the beginning of the conversation that's the goal is not necessarily to change people's, it's actually not to change people's minds about anything, but do you hope that there will be some form of impact with the film, that people will be touched in some way?
Yeah, I think both Katelyn and I, the most important thing to us from the beginning was making a film that people could relate to, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice or anything in between, to just kind of think about how we think about the origin of life and death, and to really kind of let yourself be like, let everyone for a second try to be agnostic and try to think about try to realize that like we don't really know the answers. I don't think anyone can say they know the answers to like where life begins and where it ends, and to be so certain of that. I just, from the beginning, I just wanted people to be less adamant about their own beliefs and to take more time to listen and to want to wonder about it. And so I think the aim of this film was to you know, present this really, it is a very specific idea, and there's so many other ideas and ways of thinking about life, but to just kind of let yourself be immersed in something that, in an idea about life and death that you maybe haven't seen before, and to let that affect you in whatever way it will.
Thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for taking the time to talk. It has been a lovely experience. I absolutely love the film. And I hope like a lot of other people will get to see it also. I don't know if you have screenings planned, you know, virtual events also right now because of COVID. And it would be interesting also to see that it be screened in Japan or seen by a Japanese audience, to have that feedback also. So thank you so much, Katelyn.
Thank you.
Kira.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
this
much.
is really cool. Thank you so much.